Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's talk, Exploring Messy Roots, a graphic memoir of a Wuhanese-American, features the author and illustrator Laura Gao, who will talk about her own journey as well as what inspired her to create the book. This discussion builds upon the KHC's longstanding commitment to making important connections between the extreme anti-Semitism and racism that led to the extermination of 6 million Jewish people and millions more other victim groups targeted by the Nazis during the Holocaust, as well as the deadly anti-Asian racism and xenophobia long present in our society, which has significantly escalated since the pandemic began. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York, is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify these crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Today's event is part of the 2022-23 KHC and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Trauma, Remembrance, and Compassion. It's also connected to the KHC's newest virtual and in-person exhibition, The Concentration Camps, Inside the Nazi System of Incarceration and Genocide. Our event today is co-sponsored by the Asian-American Asian Research Institute at the City University of New York, the Queensborough Community College Creative Writing Club, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College, and the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. One housekeeping note, please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce John Yee, one of this year's KHC NEH Faculty Fellows. John is a lecturer in the English department at Queensborough Community College and a doctoral student in English education at Teachers College at Columbia University. He teaches freshman composition, the accelerated program also known as ALP, and an introductory course on Asian American literature. His interest is on culturally responsive pedagogy and on fostering collaborative teaching and learning environments, particularly in digital spaces. And he has recently co-published an article in the Journal of the Assembly for Expanded Perspectives on Learning. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Laura Gao. Laura Gao is a queer artist, author, bread lover, and nomadic traveler. Originally from Wuhan, China, Laura immigrated to Dallas, Texas, and began their art career by doodling on Pokemon cards and later featured in NPR, The Mocha in New York City, and most notably, Their Parents' Fridge. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, Gao worked as a product manager in San Francisco before April 2020, when in response to anti-Asian racism and rampant misinformation about Wuhan, Laura published a webcomic, The Wuhan I Know, on Twitter, where it went viral and attracted attention from several book publishers. The comic inspired their best-selling debut graphic memoir, Messy Roots, which was published in March 2022 with HarperCollins. Besides drawing and fighting off early onset back pain, Gao enjoys biking, jamming out to music, and watching SNL. Laura's Messy Roots straddles both her Wuhanese and American identity and experiences, and her story is definitely interwoven with both humor and heartache throughout Messy Roots. It is a work that celebrates what it means to be queer, Asian American, and unapologetically Laura Gao. In celebrating her own identity, journey, and roots, Laura inspires us all to do the same in this beautifully illustrated and written debut work. Please join me in welcoming the very talented author, illustrator, and author Laura Gao. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be able to speak to all of y'all. Messy Roots really was a work straight from my heart, and it was inspired by a lot of the messiness, ugliness, but love that was going on during the pandemic. And today I would love to share with you a quick presentation about how Messy Roots came about, how it's related to my own life and the political times over the past couple of years, and excited to get also into a Q&A with John and for any audience members have questions out there as well. So to start off, I like to show a fun picture of me the very day I got my book deal on the left here, which is also coincidentally my birthday, my 24th birthday 2 years ago, May 2020. And that's my book there, Messy Roots, on the right. So to play this really fun game in the very beginning where I have people guess kind of who I am. This is me and my cousin, who, if you've read the book, my cousins are prominently featured in the book as well. But feel free if you want to put in the chat which one you think I am. There may or may not be prizes for people who guess correctly. All right, 3, 2, 1. That one's me on the very right there. So on the right, I'm going to kind of go through some background about my life and growing up in Wuhan, and then you'll also see pages from the book Messy Roots itself that kind of correlate to it. So I grew up my very earliest years of childhood. I was born and then raised for a little bit in Wuhan with my grandparents who and my cousins, who we all grew up on my like Popol's farm in the countryside of Wuhan. While my parents, they had already moved over to the US to pursue their graduate degree. And my Popo was like burly country woman who like took no crap from anyone. So you can read here, like our lovely grandma Popo, though she never finished second grade, she had a PhD in getting kids in line. And her signature weapon is her butcher knife that she would chase us with in order to get us to behave. But then a few years later, I did immigrate over with my grandparents and meet up with my parents in the US. We first settled in Louisiana, where they were pursuing the grad degree at LSU. And you can see my little brother as a baby. He was born in the States. And so on the right, I drew that Jerry, who was named sort of after Jersey, the first place that we landed in the US. Was born that day, the first official American of the family. And then we quickly moved to Texas after they graduated and got their degrees. That's where they got their jobs. And we settled in this like small town in Texas named Coppell, which at the time they were quite predominantly white, Christian, fairly conservative. So you can see me here on the left with all my friends who are also all predominantly white. And there I am, very awkwardly closeted and confused at this time. And so on the right, you can see this page of me on the first day in school and feeling just like so much like an outsider. And people are kind of whispering about me as like this new nerd. They use some derogatory language at the time. But thankfully, I had art as a way of expressing myself and as a way of just fitting in as a misfit. So I started drawing for as long as I can remember. As you heard in my bio, I was doodling on Pokemon cards. I probably drew way earlier than I even learned how to write my first English word. And my parents saw this, and I was really fortunate that my parents wanted to support that. And so they would send me to art classes and like support what I wanted to do at the time. And so on the left, this is like one of the first drawings I ever made as like a wee little kid. I drew a lot of superheroes, and especially like animals as superheroes. So that's Rudy, my extreme cat. In the middle, this is more middle grade. I drew our family dog at the time as an oil painting. And then you can kind of see my art evolve to where on the right, this is a piece that I actually end up putting in my book. If you've read it, you'll probably recognize it. And I drew this in high school as part of my AP art portfolio. And this is one of the first pieces in which I truly felt like I was embracing some inner darker side of myself and showing it to the world. And so this has some connotations of not only fitting in, but my outside perception of myself versus my inside, how happy or not I am, and like also dealing with, kind of like body dysmorphia and like queerness and, being a queer Asian in a school where everyone was anything but. I also played basketball then, and that was kind of one of my ways of sort of trying to fit in with the American athlete crowd. So you can see on the right here, this is a page where it's talking about how the varsity girls had an aura of coolness I envied. Every game day, they walked through the halls like they owned the place. I daydream about us in slow-mo, hair falling effortlessly over our shoulders while boys admire from their lockers. Remember the Name by Fort Minor blasting in the background. I wasn't there yet, but making the freshman team wasn't bad for a former mathlete, right? I proved I deserved a spot in the locker room and I plan to keep it that way. And around middle school was also the first time I went back to China. And that, like, since I had immigrated. So basically a decade later, I was around 12 or 13. That's me and my cousins again on the left. So you can see how much we've grown. Still very angsty and confused with a poor sense of taste for fashion. And on the right, you can see us talking about High School Musical. Even though we grew up a whole decade apart and a whole like ocean apart, that was one thing we could really connect on was they watched kind of like the Chinese dub version of High School Musical. And I was like, wow, like we can all, that was the thing that unified our entire generation then. And we were talking about like, oh, Troy was so cute. And I was like, oh, Gabriella too. And my older cousin, she's like, hey, like you two aren't old enough to have crushes yet. And then the biggest change for me was I went to college. I went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philly, and that was the very first time that I was in an environment that had a significant population of other Asians and Asian Americans. And so some of my first roommates here on the left, um, some of them were like Asians who grew up in Asia. Some of them were like me, like Asian Americans. And it was so cool to have this whole plethora of experiences to draw from and to relate to. And so you can see on the right here is a scene from my book where my roommate Yage and also my best friend at the time, we go to this mixer for Chinese students association, and people are speaking different languages and we're trying to meet different people. And at first I actually have a very hard time connecting because I'm kind of afraid that of this imposter syndrome of like, oh, what if they don't think I'm Chinese enough? But throughout college, I go through, this my own coming of age at the time where I get to meet all these different student groups, queer groups, Asian American groups, talk to so many people, and also meet other queer folks for the very first time too. And so this is me with my first girlfriend at the time, Valerie, who's also in the book, during graduation. And after college, I end up moving to San Francisco to work there. And San Francisco was also the very first city where I felt like, hey, this could be home. Like for so long, I've been moving place to place and nothing felt like home. But in San Francisco, there's so many Asians, there's so many queer folks. Like I feel so accepted. And I was with some of my roommates and we were looking out at the skyline that I've drawn here. And I was like, this is the life that I want to live. But of course, everything good always comes to an end somehow, right? And the place that I thought was going to be my safe haven ended up being one of the very first places of anti-Asian racism and hatred. So everyone's familiar with these headlines already. Like hopefully you are, because during the first wave of COVID was also the first big wave of anti-Asian hate. And I remember the very day that I came home from a grocery store, and I felt just so like anxious because I had just heard about a Chinese woman in the Bay Area who got attacked on at the bus. And that was just one of like so many other headlines. And I felt so helpless, like I couldn't do anything about it. But the more I thought on it, I was like, like maybe there's so much that I feel like I can't control in the world. But one thing I do have is my voice, my hands, and an iPad and my stories. And so that's when I started drawing. And I just put everything in my head on paper, almost as if it was therapy. And in my head, I talked about um, my hometown, Wuhan, and how much it meant to me and all the beautiful things about it that so many people had not really heard about because the media was only focusing on Wuhan as a COVID hotbed and about like the anti-Asian hate. And also wanted to kind of spread love, not only to, other Asians who are experiencing this, but to younger Laura, younger Yang Yang, who growing up, like this was triggering those old memories of like feeling like an outsider again. And I wanted to kind of protect her and be able to express all that into this comic. And so I ended up tweeting about it. And I thought, oh, maybe, like two of my friends and like one of my coworkers will pity like it. But lo and behold, like what I didn't expect was overnight it became viral. And a lot of news organizations picked it up, including NPR here. And so for those who haven't seen the comic, I'm going to show a really quick animation of it.
The Wuhan I know. I was born in Wuhan, China. When I was 3, my family settled in a small town in Texas, where Wuhan was more foreign than Mars. I quickly learned to be embarrassed by it every time anyone asked. The kids in class would say stuff like, Wuhan? Or, is that where the only other Asian kid in class is from? Or is that near Beijing or Shanghai? And every time, I would just think to myself, forget it, it's nowhere. But now, it's on everyone's map. I can't go an hour without my hometown being mentioned. And definitely never in good light. Now, in person and online, I would hear things like, don't bring your Wuhan germs near me, or y'all deserve it for eating weird stuff, or crazy claims like, is it true the virus is created by the Chinese to take over the world? What used to be innocent confusion has now been replaced with disgust and pity. However, I'm done hiding away this time. In the midst of all this panic, loss, and finger-pointing, I want to steer away a bit from politics to shine light on the beauty of my Wuhanese people and their rich culture and history. Number 1, the facts. Wuhan is one of the fastest growing cities in central China. It's often nicknamed the Chicago of China for being a central hub for trade, transportation, steel, and rail. It's home to 11 million people, which makes it a lot more comparable to the sizes of New York City, London, and Tokyo. Number 2, history and landmarks. One of the most famous landmarks in Wuhan is the Yellow Crane Tower. It was built in 220 AD by Emperor Sun Jian. In the sun, it shines like gold. Wuhan was formed by 3 towns, Hankou, Hanyang, and Wuchang. During the Qing dynasty, much of China's trade had been taken over by Western powers. In particular, Hankou became a trading hub for the French due to how accessible it was by both the Changjiang and Han rivers. Some of the French architecture still remains there, including the former French consulate and the former customs house. In 1911, the Chinese Revolution against the Qing rule got its turning point from the Wuchang Uprising in Wuhan. The uprising was led by Sun Yat-sen and culminated in the establishment of modern-day China. Number 3, the food. Wuhan street food is unrivaled. On any morning, you can wake up to countless stalls lining the streets with giant woks, soy milk tubs, and propane tanks. Here are some of my personal favorites. 热干面 is a hot and dry noodle that's coated in sesame paste and often served for breakfast. Doupi is a sticky rice with bits of meat and veggies that are wrapped in bean skin and fried on a giant wok. The vendors will make a huge piece, cut it into bits, and serve it one by one. Yabozi, or duck neck, is usually made insanely spicy and is very popular as a snack. In China, it's so well liked that its main chain, Zhouheya, is as ubiquitous as McDonald's is in the States. Wuhan holds a special place in my heart. It's where I was born. It's where I spent the first years of my life on my grandparents' farm before emigrating to the United States, and it's where the majority of my family still lives today. It might take some time for people to remember my hometown for things other than the virus. However, I believe if everyone continues to share the human stories to connect with each other, we will remember that this problem was a world problem and that we all banded together to rise up against it. I'm incredibly proud of my people and city for staying strong and positive through all of this. Know that we are rooting for you. 加油，武汉!
That was the original webcomic, then turned to animation. And when it went viral, I had so many amazing support from it, from people all over the world commenting. And I also had a couple publishers reach out asking if I wanted to turn it into a book. And at the time, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to say beyond this, but I got this amazing note from someone who read it, who has 2 Chinese daughters. She was a Asian-American mother. And she says, your work has helped them to talk and express how they're feeling and to feel pride in their birth country. Thank you so much for helping give them a voice. And I realized that I could do more. Like I could not only talk about Wuhan and China at this point in time, but I can share my own journey of how I came to love myself for who I am. And my continual journey with that too, like the Yang of 5 to 10 years ago would never be able to write and create such a work like this and be brave enough to share it out with the world. And so at the time I had to think, how could I really thrive as a comic artist? I had a really nice cushy job at a good company, and will really throw that all away just to become a self-employed artist. And I was thinking all that, I was really more like, can I survive, right? Like thriving, we'll try to get there later, but can I survive as a comic artist? And thankfully at the time financially I had savings from the job, but what really pushed me to take the leap was during COVID. I'm sure a lot of people have similar stories. One of my really good friends passed away very suddenly then, and he and I, we had talked a lot about what dreams we wanted to pursue. If we could, there was nothing else holding us back, no family, no societal pressures, no money. And I knew I wanted to tell stories and be an artist. And after he passed, I realized, especially with COVID, who knows, you'll have another day to walk on this earth. And if that's the case, I want to be a comic artist now. And so I went ahead and I went with it. And when I started writing my book, I went through a lot of old memories and diaries. And I also moved back home to Texas for a few months to talk with my parents and kind of get their accounts of what was happening as we immigrated in our time in Wuhan. So I'm going to share a little bit about the process. I know folks always love seeing how the juice gets made, right? So I would start off writing a script, and my script is akin to a movie script where in all the green, it shows art direction. So this is everything that you will see on the page, but will not be written out on the page. So I write here, a full page panel of me opening up the oven door and a fire rages out. Next shot or next panel of me slamming the door closed with sweat on my forehead. And then it's me, I'm saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then cuts to Jerry holding his head tightly, face red. And Jerry's like, what do we do? Call 911? And then the next art direction is a panel of me shooting him a death glare. I'm like, no way. Would you rather die from a fire or from mom and dad? So this is a scene of me and my brother when we were quite young, and we actually started a fire in the kitchen trying to make cookies. So then the next step is I usually thumbnail this out. A thumbnail is a super rough sketch of what you might see on a page, just 2 inches by 2 inches, just so I can get a good idea of spacing and pacing. And then from the thumbnail, I end up editing what I think needs to be edited and having a more high fidelity version of the sketch. So here I condensed it from 2 pages to 1 to make it go a bit faster. And then from the high fidelity pencil, then we add color. And the color is done by another queer Asian Canadian artist named Wei Shu, who is absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, she got the colors like perfectly well. So there's us being like, oh my gosh, should we call 911? I'm like, no way, would you rather die from fire from mom and dad? Here's another quick one where this is a scene in which my mom is telling me, and I'm also quite young at the time. I had just, it was around first grade, I believe, and I was so tired of all the teachers messing up my Chinese name and all the kids making fun of me for it. And I had, kind of come home and like march right up to her. I'm like, Mom, I want a new name. I want an American name. And then she ends up telling the story of like how I got my name, my Chinese name. So my mom goes, well, Gao, our last name, means tall and mighty like the skies. Yu means the universe, infinite and mysterious. And lastly, Yang means the seas, peaceful and safe. And everything in blue here is what's said in Mandarin. And in the book, some things are in blue that are translated and some things are not. I wanted my book to also be a bilingual book. And then I kind of give this little meme as a reference to myself in the art. I'm like, show me looking confused with the algebra meme like this. And then it cuts back to mom looking super cheery and happy and angelic. My mom's like, all together, it means you are the world. And then it cuts back to me looking unamused. Mom, that's so cheesy. And that's the quick sketch that I made at the time of her explaining, and then me doing the algebra meme. I'm like, oh, that's so cheesy, Mom. And then from the sketch, then goes to the final high fidelity colored version here. And as you see the color, like we played around with quite a few color schemes, and you can see some of the options on the left that we didn't end up going for. We ended up doing a really cool combination of 3 different color schemes that had a lot of like colors and that were similar, like the yellows and reds to kind of symbolize the Chinese American heritage. But it changed color schemes based on what location wise the book took place. So you notice the book split quite evenly between Texas, San Francisco, and Philly, which kind of grouped together, and then Wuhan. And Texas has these like grays and browns and like more muddy colors to show how maybe like boxed in, like suffocating it sort of felt at the time. And then San Francisco has all these like beautiful blues and bright colors to show, just the expansiveness of it and how open it is and how like accepted I felt. And then Wuhan has these nice like oranges and greens that are more like mystical, more nostalgic, as someone who's like visiting back to a hometown that maybe no longer feels like home anymore, but has that remnant, that trinket of memories. And I also was inspired by a lot of other artists, some of whom hopefully you'll recognize as like other really awesome queer and or like Asian American artists here. The Magic Fish by Trung Nguyen, Spinning by Tilly Walden, and one of the very first graphic novels that I read and kind of referenced in the book too is American Born Chinese by Jean Nguyen Yang. And I also got inspiration from movies. One of my faves, Moana here. This is a scene where, she's kind of like confronting the spirits that she's been chasing after. And then I kind of use this to mirror me confronting the spirits. In the book, it's a white rabbit, akin to kind of like white rabbit candy, and also the rabbit with Chang'e on the moon, which is a Chinese folk tale. And that rabbit to me symbolizes like my own Asianness, and my otherness that I'm trying to embrace. And it's like inside of me, like this beast is roaring, but I'm not letting it out. I'm constantly in conflict. Similar to like Naruto and like the Nine-Tailed Beast. I was like a huge manga fan, so that was like a big like a big inspiration too. And at first, whenever I'm confronting it, the rabbit takes up most of the page. Composition wise, I want to show like initially the rabbit holds most of the power, you know. I'm simply just like being confronted by it. But once I get to the scene where I fully accept and embrace that, like, hey, I have all these other layers and multitudes, and maybe I don't know how to reconcile them yet, but I'm going to figure it out. And it's not for anyone else to judge. Then we see this more 50-50 split where now I am in balance with that rabbit. You know, Moana is in balance with the spirit, and we've decided to meet halfway in like what we're trying to achieve. Like we now have full respect for each other. And then, so the book total took about 2 years, and it launched in March of this year. And I was really, really happy and fortunate that it got such a very like welcome, burst to the world. The first couple of weeks, it landed on the bestsellers list. And it was also nominated for a Harvey Award, which is one of the industry's like biggest comic awards. And I got to go to a bunch of really awesome events and like meet other artists and authors who, like, growing up, I've never met a single other author artist in my life, and I didn't know what that was like. But it was great to be able to kind of live that life and fully embrace my dream. So that is sort of the story of how Messy Roots came about. Thank you all so much for listening. And here's sort of like my contact information, social, and website if you want to see more of my work. But I'd love to spend the rest of the time with John discussing the book and the process and what it means about my identity in this day and age of the world.
Yeah, Laura, thank you so much for that beautiful talk. I think you answered so much of what was on my mind. I think in looking at your work and sort of quote unquote teaching your work, I think that we could definitely get a good sense of how so much of who you are is built beautifully into the story from start to finish. Maybe an appropriate question to begin with. And I encourage all of you to, like, please ask a question, please leave a question. And I really appreciate all of you who are here today. Maybe the whole ethos of the graphic genre. I think a part of my selection process of using books is to sort of like bring students into the text and bring them into their own literacy journey.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays students are so visual, right? They're visually sort of like really adept at really looking at images and symbolism and graphics. I think on a similar level, I do have peers who might not think seriously of the graphic genre. I was just wondering if you could share your thoughts as to how you see sort of the graphic genre as sort of a relevant medium through which we can like look at our literacy journey. And I think I'm also thinking about what you said related to, wanting to make this a bilingual book for readers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think comics and graphic novels definitely now have seen a huge resurgence in popularity. And I think it's being taken more seriously as like a literary form of art and consumption too. And without getting to like the nitty gritty and it's like what is like literature versus what other kinds of media, I think comics just really sits as another really awesome medium for folks who it's not fully like a TV or movie where it's like all visual. It's not fully as like just a prose book. And I think there is space for something to marry the two together. And for me, like one of the really awesome things about comics is you can get the story and the text, but there's so much more that you can add to it where the panel sizes, just depending on how you even change how you assemble all the art together on a page, can change a story so much that you may not have to think about in TV or movie because the screen size is the same, right? And I think another great thing about comics is that it's like kind of the same way that you really can't compare like a podcast to a book, right? Or like all these like new forms of media that are popping up. Comics is really great also for like early readers and like folks to where this is the first time that they're seeing these words on paper. And, you know, we talked about like that bilingual, multilingual reader too, where I remember growing up reading a lot of manga and like reading also, you know, American Born Chinese and a few other like graphic novels. And one of the very first comic books I got was I was like 3 or 4, you know, about to immigrate. And it was this silent comic that was from a Russian comic artist actually. And I kind of use that as my own language learning too, where I would like draw in speech bubbles for the people, even though it was a silent comic, and like write, you know, what I thought they said. And I want that to happen with my book too, where even though there were speech bubbles, some of which are in Chinese, some are in English, I knew that like if my family in China ever read this and if it wasn't translated fully, like I still want them to kind of get the gist of what was happening on the page. Like you can get so much through the context clues and the art that you don't have to be fully fluent in both languages to get it.
Okay, wonderful. And I was wondering, like, I think you shared this really wonderfully. I was wondering if you could like walk us through maybe the narrative process of like maybe, I think a lot of my students had asked too, what made you choose the certain parts that you did when you were growing up in Wuhan, sort of the sequencing and what made you choose those specific, I guess, scenes and storylines, particularly in, I think in chapter 1 and why you started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted initially to be able to kind of juxtapose my experiences in Wuhan with my experiences in the US. And not only like back then when I was a kid, but also juxtapose it now too with Wuhan being so big in the news. And so I do start chapter 1 with the Wuhan I know, and you know, starts immediately with this like really vibrant, like fun, exciting scene of like me and my cousins. We were riding on a water buffalo and running away from my grandma, who's like running after us with a butcher knife because we definitely should not be riding that water buffalo. And you know, we're getting to like all these shenanigans, and I'm just like having the time of my life. Like I feel like this is just home. You know, there's nothing else to like question about it. Um, and then like it quickly then juxtaposes to like when I had to immigrate over, and I don't understand the language. I don't understand like the culture and the people there. And so that was like I wanted to show that dichotomy in my experiences then. And also choosing the scenes later on in Wuhan when the first time that I visit, it almost does like a 180 where then at that time I felt like the foreigner going back to Wuhan. You know, people would comment that I like talked weird or like dressed weird. I even like had to go shopping with my cousins because they're like, oh, you know, you can't look like a white boy in here. You can't look like a foreigner. Like we're going to like dress you like a local. And even though like that was alienating like, towards the end of those like Wuhan scenes, I also write in, you know, kind of get into shenanigan again with my cousins where we like sneak out at night and like kind of run to this like barbecue place and we get into another shenanigans, like kind of the old times again, you know, like even though it's been a decade and we grew up in different parts, like this is like one part of home that I can always cling on to. So I wanted to be able to show that dichotomy through every scene in Wuhan.
And I think to that end, I know there are a lot of student writers here, a lot of creative writing students. What is your advice for them, maybe starting off as artists and maybe wanting to build a platform for themselves? Because I know you're big on social media. And how can they start telling their stories and how can they really begin like working on their craft?
Yeah, I always tell folks, you know, start really small, and don't be afraid to post crappy things too. I actually made a tweet thread where like the very first thing I said was like, post all your crappy work, because it can be very, very like almost like artists stage fright to want to hold on to something so personal and to make sure it is even more than perfect before you ever show it to the world. But I can definitely say if I had did that with the Wuhan I know, like it would never have gone out and I never would be where I am today. And even today, when I look back, like when I watched that animation that just played, and then I like to like nitpick and be like, oh, I drew like 4 fingers here instead of 5, or like, that color probably would have looked better if it was a darker purple instead of that purple. Um, but that's to remind myself, like we all have lives. I was working a full-time job, I had other commitments. Like I was just trying to get words down on paper, and I very quickly sketched that in a coffee shop over a week. And I posted it not thinking that like I wanted to get some kind of book deal out of it. Like I didn't even know what that was at the time, but I posted it purely because it was a work of passion, and it didn't have to be perfect for that passion and story to come across. And yeah, and like that got me to where I am today. And sometimes you strike gold, and sometimes you just kind of keep going and improving. So like before, even the one I know, I used to like just draw really short comics, 3-4 panels, or like I would do this really cool, like really fun comics diary, where at the end of the day, every night, I would just draw a short comic of some memory of that day I wanted to cherish and like record. And so if folks, if ultimately you want to make a book, but for now you can only just like draw a single page or like write a single page, like go ahead and do that and share that. And who knows where it'll come out.
Awesome. And let's get like others in the Q&A. I mean, if anyone has a question, please ask. I know I have a ton more questions, but I definitely want others to maybe chime in with their question. I know that a question that I think Marissa brought up was the dedication section, right? And I think one of the people you dedicate Messy Roots to is Miss Alexandra. And yeah, if you could like walk us through that and tell us a little bit about maybe your connection to who Miss Alexandra is in terms of like how she inspired you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Miss A is she's not a character in the book, but I dedicated the book to her because she was actually a high school teacher of mine. She taught econ, and she was one of the first teachers that I felt truly just went above and beyond in her role as an instructor and became a mentor figure and like an on figure to me during a very tumultuous time where I had felt like, the whole world was against me. And she was there with like kind of like open arms and took me in. I remember like spending a lot of days after school, just like in her classroom, like as she was grading papers. And then we would just be like talking about like anything and everything. Like if I ever had any problems with my parents at home and like didn't feel, safe to go back or something, like she would just kind of like house me in her classroom. If I ever had any problems with any like racist things at school, like, she would always be there to talk with me about it. And I think she was the very first person to also push me to think above and beyond to where I, at the time I wasn't confident in like what I wanted to do, but she was the one who pushed me to like pursue my dreams and like take the leap and, apply to colleges outside of Texas, go out and like live your life. And so, and like we have stayed in touch ever since. And even, especially when I was first thinking about, oh, like, should I like take the leap to, do this book and become a full-time artist? Like she was one of the first people I called immediately to talk this through with. And she's been my biggest cheerleader ever since.
Amazing. And I think that speaks volumes, right? And I think for the educators who are here today, I think that really inspires us all to really think about our jobs and our roles as educators, because we never know, right? We never know to what degree we're really impacting a student's life, right? And I know another shout out you have is your brother, and so many of my students want to know about that sort of sibling dynamic with you and your brother, and how are things now between you two?
Yeah, my brother and I are still really tight. He actually like is now in college also at the University of Pennsylvania. And so because he went to the same school too, like he often like calls for advice or, now that we're in similar life stages, we're able to like talk about even like deeper things. So we're still really great. we still have our own like adventures and shenanigans where we just went to Europe together for like a sibling bonding trip. And I'm really glad that like the readers loved Jerry and the book, because I think our sibling dynamic is quite relatable or to a lot of like immigrant siblings where you feel like your sibling's the only person who really understands the stuff that you might be going through, you know, with this like conflict, maybe with your parents or maybe with the outside world compared to your own family. And I think we definitely share that bond.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm looking at the Q&A, and I think there's a great question. Asha asks, why do you get someone else to color your drawings? I think maybe that collaboration is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I chose to hire a colorist partly because this book was on an expedited timeline where we knew, you know, given the content, the topic of this book and everything going on in the world right now, like this book needed to be published yesterday. And so we wanted to be able to kind of streamline that process and make sure that I might personally wasn't feeling like too burnt out trying to do everything in this shortened timeline. So it made sense for me to like myself to focus on the story and like the art, and then for someone else to then like take my vision of like what I want the color to be and like execute that in a way better manner that I personally could have done too. Like I personally am not a huge fan of like coloring myself, so I'm like really glad that like someone who's way better at it could also like take it and, you know, turn it into like such a beautiful reality. And as for collaboration, we Wei and I, we like called every single week, and we had like a long design session where we would go through like the pages for that week, and I kind of like show her the art, and you know, we would discuss like what color would look best here and there. You know, is there a part of the line art that like I need to edit in order to make her coloring a lot easier too? Where sometimes like you may not even see the line, it would just be replaced by the color, and those are all deliberate decisions that we would make together.
Okay, wonderful. That's really insightful. I think another question is, how has life been like during COVID? Have things been difficult, hard to maintain? And I guess I'd be remiss to maybe ask you, like, how have you and your family been faring along? Like, you know, I'm kind of checking in with you now, and I guess to sort of follow up on that, like, I was wondering, because you mentioned this so beautifully, and I think at an appropriate time, right? Could you speak about like the recent wave of anti-Asian hate and the violence, and maybe your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my family recently has been doing well, thankfully. My parents are still kind of like living alone in Texas right now, and the rest of my family in Wuhan have been doing as well as they can. I think it was definitely quite scary in 2020 when, you know, Wuhan like shut down, and my mom and I, we were originally planning on visiting at the very beginning in 2020, but we canceled our flight right before the shutdown, or else we probably would have been stuck there too. And it was really disheartening because, you know, we were going for my grandma's 80th birthday, and to go from this mindset of like celebrating her life to then being in fear of like, well, will she make it? Was a huge change for us. And to feel also helpless because, you know, we can't go there, we can't be with her. We can only just like call on FaceTime or like call on like WeChat video, and hope that like she knows how to navigate the buttons on WeChat video. Thankfully, like our younger cousin kind of like taught her some of that before things really went down. And I also like feared a lot for my parents who, you know, they're still in that like predominantly white town, but and it's like really ironic that like at the time they didn't like see much in their small town, probably just because like it's quite small. But like in San Francisco, you know, every week there was some kind of like headline about a you know, Asian person being attacked. And even one time I went on the street to go like mail out something, and then like this guy just kind of walked by and like laughed and like spat towards me. And you know, just like very small things like that can make you feel quite unsafe. But now like I'm, you know, I'm still in San Francisco, and I think like we're still very like wary of like what could happen. Like I think that Asian solidarity here has been great, and that like everyone tries to like help out each other, make sure you're not like walking alone at home to home at night, and just like making each other feel empowered that way.
Okay, wonderful. And I think to follow up, Professor Alison Chimino asks, if you can please talk about a time you failed or had to work with your inner critic prior to success. What would that what did that look like? How was that process like for you?
Yeah, especially around art, this book deal was the first like real like professional success I had, and that really just kind of came out of nowhere with like the comic going viral on social media. But before then, I remember there was a time, it was about like a year or so into my old like traditional desk job, that um I felt really jaded about what I was doing. And I knew like I wanted to get in the creative arts somehow. I don't know how. And at Penn, I studied statistics, but I also took a few classes in animation just for fun, and like had a really good time. And so at the time I was like, okay, maybe I'll just like kind of test the waters a bit. I'll like craft the animation portfolio, submit that to like Sub Studio, see if like just something pans out. And I remember like I don't even think I had enough like video material at the time to make like a full 3-minute reel that everyone wanted. Like I had to I took some of my comics and I almost like made like short TikToks of the comics. I was like, oh, I hope they take this. And I was like truly unprepared. And I think that really showed when over the course of the next couple of months, I got rejection after rejection from every studio I sent a portfolio to, whether the big ones or even just like small, very indie ones. Um, and at the time, like I felt like it could have like brought me down, and it could have made me like quit my artistic pursuits like in general. And I was kind of disappointed from it, but but I also sort of expected it, knowing that like my portfolio wasn't nearly the quality of like what I knew my portfolio could be. And that actually ended up kind of energizing me to where I was like, hey, like, yes, y'all rejected me, but like I'm kind of proud that I even like put together a portfolio in the first place, where even just like a few months ago I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I ended up like signing up for a couple more classes at the local community college here in San Francisco, like art classes that I would take like after work in order to like beef up that portfolio. And I was like, you know what, I can always try again. And that's sort of like what I did, is like I signed up for the class, put kind of like my mind to it. And the Wuhan I know, like that was me kind of like exercising my art and trying to like create something after like all these rejections as well.
Wow, that's really empowering and I think inspiring to all of us, right, who are trying to accomplish like many like great things in our lives. Like I think a reason why kind of thinking about these larger terms in terms of like trauma, remembrance, and compassion, I think a big reason as to why I chose you and your work is because I think in so many ways I was looking at myself, right, as an Asian American in the US, particularly during these past 2.5 years. And I think so much of what you say resonates with me. And, I really thank you for giving so many of us here today, confidence, visibility, and presence. So I really, really appreciate you. And I just wish all the success to you and your future endeavors. Last quick question. Are you working on anything now? And like, how can we find out?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Like I had an amazing time talking with you and like sharing with all the students and faculty here. I am currently working on my second book with HarperCollins as well. And I can't share too much about it, but you can definitely expect it to be very like queer and Asian as well. And you can find out more deets about that if you like follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Hey Laura Gao. I like to like post kind of like process as I go. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you everyone for joining. It's been a wonderful time, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.